All right, so I see that everybody is pretty familiar with the chat function, which is awesome. If you haven't been on a call yet, my name is Jessica Wright, and I'll be moderating today's event. Just a few housekeeping notes. We're placing everybody on mute, and we ask that you remain on mute for the duration of the presentation. We would like this to be interactive and engaging, so please feel free to send questions in the chat. If you're unsure of how the chat function works, there's a little bar that pops up at the bottom, and the chat is located on the right of the screen. You can adjust the view so you can see more than a couple lines, and we highly encourage video from everybody, so don't be shy. Today's presentation I'm really excited for, as many of you have completed internships or are looking to begin your career this year. You understand the importance of one-on-one meetings either with a mentor or your supervisor. Today's presentation will discuss how to get the most out of that meetings, from preparation to follow-up. Stacie VanSkiver, Human Resource Manager for Corning Environmental Technologies Global Engineering, is our presenter today. So this is a part of a weekly series that has some really great topics geared towards those beginning or early in their career. I highly recommend you join as you're available or watch the webinars when we do release them. So with that, Stacie, I'm turning it over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone, and thanks for taking some time out of your day this holiday weekend to invest in your careers. I think you'll appreciate the time that you're taking to really invest in yourself, and I hope that you all brought some snacks with you, and don't mind my background noise. Since it is the holiday weekend, I decided to take this call today enjoying a little outdoor weather and temperature, so I hope that you're all able to do the same. So again, as Jessica mentioned, we're going to be talking today about how to get the most out of a one-on-one conversation. And we'll invest a lot of time talking about your supervisor, but I think most of the tools that we're going to talk about can really be used in any one-on-one conversation in your career, whether you're talking to a coach, a mentor, or frankly, if you reach that point in your career where you're the leader or you're the mentor or you're the coach, I think a lot of the tools will apply throughout your career. So before we get started, I would just like to, using the chat feature, do a check. How many of you have had a at least mostly full-time role before, whether it was a job prior to going into school or whether it was an internship, and have participated in a one-on-one meeting? So if you can just chime in the chat box with a, just say me, just to give us a sense for how many of you have done that before. Great, I see lots of me's popping in. That's good, that's good. So for those of you who don't, that's fine. I just think it will be helpful for some of you who have had meetings like this before to have those as a frame of reference. So before we get started, for those who said me, what is one thing that you really found to be the most productive in a one-on-one meeting? And you can use the chat feature again. I'll ask the question differently. It might help with, what did you enjoy the most? Okay, so being prepared, staying on topic, consistent time slots, having objectives, no distractions, full attention, consistent structure, attention. Okay, good. Good. We're going to be talking about how to create the atmosphere for some of those very things as we go through. So the first thing I really want to talk about is a one-on-one is if not the most important meeting you can have, pretty darn close. When you get out into the workforce, you get a lot of daily distractions. A lot goes on in a workforce. There's a ton of meetings. People will have visibility to you and access to you in a variety of settings, and really everything that you do is in some way a job interview. You're always a bit on showcase. Your one-on-ones are some of the most important times to be able to really have a good conversation with your manager or boss to make sure that they know what you're working on, the impact that you're delivering, to talk about your career, where you can get the help and the resources that you need. And so really a one-on-one should be focused on a few key things. One, it's about building a trusting relationship with your manager and your direct reports. It's where you can really get to know each other better, get to understand each other better, learn sort of what makes each other tick, how you get your work accomplished, how you thrive the best. It helps you to stay informed and it keeps alignment. There's nothing worse than investing a lot of your time and energy and a lot of yourself into a project, and to be moving through with that project and your goals and objectives only to find out that you weren't really delivering what your supervisor was expecting. And the one-on-one can be a great way to get that alignment and stay informed. It's a good opportunity to share mutual feedback and to help each other grow, and we'll talk a little bit more about the most effective way to do that. To help with the topics that can sometimes get lost in the day-to-day or the stop by the office sort of conversation. And it can be a good time to focus on your career and your development, and also just opening communications and giving honest feedback. Oh, we're hung up here. Did that by any chance transition for you all?
It did not.
Well, let me, when all else fails, we'll cheat the system a little. There we go.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So one-on-ones are really about sharing. So what I'd like to ask is, consider a time when you had a one-on-one interaction with somebody and it didn't go well. And then if you could use the chat feature to just share what types of things, you don't have to get specific or give a person or example, but what types of things happened during that one-on-one discussion that you think led to it being a less efficient discussion than it should have been? Yes, off on a tangent, misunderstanding, ran out of time, different levels of technical capability, trying to make a decision. Good, good. Those were great examples of exactly what can go wrong during a one-on-one communication, and you've all already shared some examples, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on what you can do. I'm seeing when one person is not prepared, absolutely. Or when two people prepare differently, that's another thing that can be a challenge, right? Part of what we really want to make sure we get across today is that communication has to be a two-way street and a two-way process. And success really is attained when parties get to the same understanding of what has been communicated. And there's some tips that you can leverage and use to really help to get the most out of your communication. And I would encourage you to continue to watch the chat as we're going through too, because others are sharing some great ideas. And so I really want to make sure as we go through this session today, you're not just hearing Stacie talk. So all of your peers who are sitting in this session have had some great experiences too, and we'll have a lot of ideas to share. And we'll go through the slide deck pretty quickly, because I think you'll get the most benefit out of this session when we get to the end and really talk about how our strategies to manage some of the challenges that you've brought up. One-on-ones are really a joint responsibility, and for those of you who said me when I asked the question at the beginning, you probably found that you had varying experiences, especially if you've had two jobs where you had multiple bosses, and what you may have found is that those bosses had very different beliefs and strategies about how one-on-ones are supposed to go. I have had bosses where they really left it up to me. If I wanted a one-on-one, I was supposed to schedule it, come with the agenda, drive it. I've had other bosses who schedule a pretty frequent and regular cadence, and they have a set agenda that they want to go through every one-on-one, and I've had pretty much everything in between. So what I'm going to talk about today is we did some best practice sharing as an HR team here in my work group at Corning, and we really talked about what we think are some of the best practices with one-on-ones. I'm here to tell you, you're going to go out in the workforce and get people who don't agree with this approach or have their own style or approach that works for them. And that's fine, but I think you have to find what works for you and get you what you need as an employee, and then find a way to ensure that you're getting that in the workplace. And we really recommend that a one-on-one be driven by an employee. It's really an employee's time to be able to get what they need to be able to deliver their impact and resources. And so we do recommend that as best practice. It really can help an employee feel more ownership in their work, more autonomy over decisions, and ensure that you don't run into some of the problems and challenge that you all just mentioned above. I can't tell you the number of times I've had a one-on-one discussion and I go in with my list of these are the things I need help with, I need to get some obstacles removed, I need some tools, I need some resources, or I just need a decision. Somebody said struggle with make a decision. That's a big one, right? You spend a lot of time talking, but to get that to an actionable decision can sometimes be a challenge. And if we both go in with a long list of items and we have a 30-minute one-on-one, it can be really hard to drive to those things. So if you have a practice set up where the one-on-one is really scheduled as the employee's time to get what they need, and then the manager schedules additional time if there's things that they want to communicate out, we have found that that tends to work the most effectively. But I think the biggest thing that I would call out here is it's really important that you don't make this assumption going into a new role or a new job with a new boss. You really want to talk to them right from the beginning around what the expectations are in this area. I typically would start with how frequently do you like to have one-on-ones? How do you tend to run one-on-ones? Would you like me to show up with an agenda? Will you have an agenda? Are we going to have a shared session where it's 15 minutes, 30, however we want to set that up? Really getting that alignment and shared communication in advance is important. I have seen a lot of scenarios in a lot of companies where people don't take the time to do that, and they jump to general assumptions about what a one-on-one is going to be, and they end up really missing an opportunity for good conversation. And several of you mentioned this. It ends up being this laundry list of things that you want to talk through, and you never get through your list. The other thing is that it's really important to have progress towards goals as a standing agenda item. Somebody mentioned in the chat feature, it's really easy to get focused on the day-to-day. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Oh, I had this conversation yesterday. Have you heard? And it becomes an update session on the daily things. And that's fine. You need a little of that time with your supervisor to have those dialogues. But the other thing that we really recommend is you're going to have some very strategic and important goals. And those goals are going to be necessary for the organization to move forward. We strongly recommend that if you're going to have one-on-ones, build in time in those one-on-ones as a regular update towards those goals and initiatives, and have a project plan, and make sure that in that project plan you've captured what you need to have done by this one-on-one so that you're giving an update and showing your supervisor where you're on track. And if you're not on track, having an honest discussion about what the obstacles are and what help they can provide you to get you back on track. Career development, learning, and promotion opportunities. If you're going to have those conversations in a regular one-on-one as opposed to setting up a separate meeting, our recommendation is that you let your supervisor know in advance that you'd like to have that conversation. Give them some time to prepare for that conversation. You'll find it to be a lot more fruitful and meaningful conversation if they've had time to think about kind of where some of your gaps are, where the developmental areas are, and what they might want to talk to you about in that particular topic. It's usually not a subject in a standing one-on-one. It would be a special topic. So it is advised that you give them some notice in advance. And either you can say, at our next one-on-one, I was hoping we could find some time to discuss, or send them an email in advance, but just give them that courtesy opportunity to prepare. And I think you'll find that that will help you a lot to get more out of that discussion. A one-on-one is also a chance to really get some feedback from each other on how things are going. One of the topics that I have talked to quite a lot of groups about, and I think I mentioned this last week in Snacks with Stacie if you were on that one, feedback can be really hard. It's hard to ask people for feedback. It's even harder to give feedback to someone who's senior to you in an organization. We use the term feedback here. If that's something that you're uncomfortable with and you feel is a struggle for you, I'm going to give you a piece of advice, and that is replace the word feedback with advice. One of the things you can do in a one-on-one is say, here's some of the challenges and hurdles that I'm running into on this project. Here's what I've tried. What advice do you have for me? What might I consider doing differently? And it really helps to make that conversation a lot more comfortable, because as opposed to looking backward, you're really looking forward. And it also helps it to become a more actionable discussion because you leave with some very concrete ideas about what you can do differently going forward. The same thing goes up. If you're going to be trying to give feedback to a supervisor, that can be really uncomfortable, especially early career. I can remember some of the first few times in my career when I had to give feedback to my boss, I felt like my stomach was doing flips and turns. It was really uncomfortable. So a tactic that I have tried that's worked really well for me is to say, would you mind if I offered some advice? Or would you mind if I suggested perhaps a different approach? You can kind of get the sense already just with me saying those, how that conversation might go from there, as opposed to me saying, can I give you feedback? It just is a different conversation. And so that's some tools that I would recommend that you put away and consider for the future. It shouldn't just focus on one-on-one status updates or performance only. It really needs to be a blend of progress updates on current projects, quick tactical updates and status updates, career, and then relationship building. If you don't build in time for one-on-ones for relationship building, you miss out on a really significant opportunity to build a stronger working relationship, whether it's with a supervisor or whether it's with a coach. That relationship time is really important. And that sounds like a no-brainer, right? Nobody's going to argue with me saying that. I will tell you it is not first nature for people to do that naturally. The relationship piece is a real struggle for some individuals. And so for some of us, that's sort of natural. We're just, you can kind of sense just from the conversation that Jessica and I had in the beginning, right? We're talkative, we're social. That building the relationship piece is natural. That's not going to be the case for everybody, and that's perfectly okay. If that's not natural for you, then you can really work through it by strategically planning in advance. So maybe it's today, I'm going to carve time out of this one-on-one to ask the individual what their holiday plans are for this weekend, or to ask them what they did last weekend. It's really almost building it into a process or an agenda. And I did see a question just pop up, Jessica, but I didn't get to read it before it disappeared. What was the question?
It says, can you be more specific on how to build a strong relationship?
Absolutely. So I think that's a great question, and we could probably have a whole session just on building relationships. But let me give you a few key things that I have found work the most effectively. One is to ask a lot of questions and be genuinely interested and curious about people. People will trust you more and want to have a better working relationship with you if they think that you care about them. Think is the wrong word. If they know you care about them as a person and not just an employee. And so really asking a lot of questions to show interest. And it can be, some people are not people who want to talk a lot about life outside of work. So it might be simple questions like, do you have any animals? Where'd you go to college? Tell me about it. What'd you major in? That's interesting. Are you from that area originally? Just some come up with what I call conversation starter types of questions. The more vested interest you take in somebody, the stronger that your relationship is going to be. The other things that you can do are share a little bit more about yourself. Make yourself more personalized and somebody that people are a little bit more comfortable approaching and having conversation with. And that's really how you get started in a relationship. From there, a lot of it depends on trust and credibility. The more that I believe that you as my colleague are going to deliver what you said you're going to deliver, that you're going to be honest and upfront and transparent with me, and the more that I believe you have a vested interest in me and my career and that we have common goals, the stronger our relationship is going to be. And it's not something that happens naturally. You will find people as you go through your career that it does happen naturally. You have a lot in common. There's a natural synergy. The relationship just happens because you're close, you think a lot alike, and then you're going to find a lot of other people in your career where it doesn't happen that naturally and you struggle a little bit more. In those situations, that's where I think you want to plan for it and be a little bit more purposeful. And that could particularly happen with your boss. Sometimes you'll get a boss who's a little bit more rigid might be a term that you would use, but a little bit more filtered, a little bit more protective, a little bit less likely to be vulnerable. And that can be a little bit harder when you're trying to build a relationship. And in that case, it's a lot of times about the impact that you deliver. It's focused on the results. For some people, that's how you build a relationship, is you show them that they can trust you and that you're going to deliver what you say you're going to deliver. So hopefully that helps to offer a few tips there. So the next thing, sorry, you probably heard that one. That was a very loud motorcycle. So the next thing is we're going to talk routine. So somebody mentioned during the chat feature having a schedule, knowing when they're going to be, having a cadence. That is really important to one-on-ones. if you have a session, and I've had supervisors that do this, and sometimes the job requires it, and it's just you don't have a choice. But it's really hard if you don't know every week, is my one-on-one on Monday this week? Is it going to be on Thursday this week? Was it canceled? Is it going to happen? It's really hard to be prepared and get the most out of your one-on-ones without a cadence. So we do recommend trying to have a routine. It can really help be a powerful tool. A couple of the things that I do with my direct reports, for example, is I always try to schedule my one-on-ones to be within 24 hours of the senior staff meetings that I sit in on. And that way, coming out of those one-on-ones, I can give them updates. I can share with them the information and feedback that I learned from those meetings. If I don't have that immediately following, there's really important things that I have the best of intentions, but I forget to tell them because 2 days later, it's just off my mind. So building it around critical organizational structures or processes or other meetings is a great way to have one-on-ones. And then the other thing that does is mentally it ties your one-on-ones to those meetings. So you really know I'm always going to have my one-on-one with Sally or Jimmy immediately following that business review meeting that we have on Wednesdays. So that's a really great way to do it, and it lets you get into a rhythm and a pattern and lets you be a lot more prepared. The timing really matters. You know, it does. You have to really look at the job and the content. I've had supervisors where I felt like we could use a one-on-one every day. I've had supervisors where once a month was fine, and a lot of it was about our relationship and our style, and then sometimes it's just about the work and the content and what we do. For those of you who answered earlier that you've had one-on-ones in the past, what frequency did you have them? And you can use the chat. Weekly, once a month, weekly, monthly, weekly, once a month. Okay, once a summer. Weekly in theory, but really more like quarterly. Yep. Okay, good. Good. I think you all just demonstrated exactly what I'm saying. And really, I think what you have to do to be effective is learn how to get really good at assessing the situation and the dynamic and deciding how frequently you need them. I've had some bosses where I feel like we're a lot more effective if we don't have them calendared and we catch up as often as we need to. I've had other bosses where I really felt like in order to show what I was doing, I needed to have those weekly meetings. And then I've had other bosses where I was in really a pretty strategic role. There wasn't a lot that would change on a week-to-week basis, and if we were to talk weekly, there might not be much to talk about, and monthly made more sense. So what I would really encourage you to do is to get pretty good at assessing the situation. And one way to do that is I would start by knowing yourself. How often do you feel like you need that contact? Not uncommon at all to have it be more frequent early in your career and get a little bit less frequent as you grow in your career. The other thing I would assess is, what does your supervisor like? Are they somebody who wants to be fully up to speed and really into the details of everything you're doing? Are they somebody who wants to be able to sit up in the cockpit at 60,000 feet and get the updates as you're coming into the airport to land, right? Different supervisors are going to have different needs and expectations, and it's going to be both about their style but also about the project. You might be on a project that the deliverables it's going to be a 2 to 3 year project. They probably don't want to meet with you weekly on that. They probably want more of a monthly, or as some of you said, a quarterly update. So it really is about the work content and the situation. But most importantly, it's about the A word I used in the beginning, right? It's about alignment. You have to find a way to meet the needs of both parties in the conversation and figure out what frequency makes sense. So we talked a lot about one-on-ones with your supervisor, but what about a coach? How often should you meet with them? And when I asked that question, I assume probably most of you were answering for your boss. How frequently do you think you should meet with a coach?
Stacie, before we switch slides to while we're waiting for responses, I do have a question. So just an FYI.
Okay. Okay.
Do you want me to ask this now? Yeah, I can wait.
I was going to say, why don't you can go ahead and ask now, and I'll circle back to that when we get some answers.
Perfect. So they were just wondering, so if your supervisor is a last-minute person, how can you be more assertive to make that one-on-one a schedule? Like if they're the type of person that says, come tomorrow, or are you free in half an hour? How can they really push that schedule with a supervisor?
Well, I think it starts with just being willing to ask for it. A lot of times what I see is that people are uncomfortable to ask for what they need, and they let the supervisor sort of dictate and guide and direct that. And by the way, at the end of the day, if that truly is the supervisor style, you're probably not going to change your supervisor if that's inherent to their personality. But more often than not, it's that they're busy, right? I can tell you I have fallen guilty of this as a supervisor myself. You're busy, you have thousands of distractions in a day, you have a lot going on, and sometimes one-on-ones become, you want to have them, you want to invest in your people, you want to be able to spend the time, but it's really hard because you have a lot of other things going on. And so more often than not, it's that they are not intending for it to work out that way. It's just sort of the fallout from day-to-day work. So I would start always with asking. You know, there is nothing wrong with saying, hey, I noticed our last 2 to 3 one-on-ones have been canceled, or we sort of shifted it at the last minute. I find that I'm a pretty structured person, and while I can learn to go with the flow, I think I would be more effective if we could go with a routine schedule. Is that something that you think you'd be willing to commit to? There's nothing insulting or offending about saying it that way. Now, if you were to say, hey, you've canceled our last 3 one-on-ones, what's up? I need that time. That's a different tone, right? So what you'll really effectively do in your career is learn how to ask for the things you need and ask for it in a way that's very business professional, very mutual win-win focused. The more that you get better at asking for things like that, the more that you're going to get what you need. Now, I would try that once. I would try it not twice. Sometimes I might take to just putting them on the calendar myself and scheduling them and see how that works. But at the end of the day, you won't inherently change someone's personality. So sometimes you do need to learn how to effectively work with people who have different styles from you. And so where I've had supervisors like that who really do operate better a bit more, I call it on the fly, or just want to be able to take advantage of that opportunity time as we get it. I've used tools like OneNote or tools like the Notes feature on my iPhone to have a constant list ready. I don't have to prepare in advance because I'm prepared literally every second of every day. When I have something I want to talk to my supervisor about, I capture it on that list, and then I just try to take the best advantage and opportunity I can of the time that I'm given with them. And I'm always prepared by having that note. It's on my phone, it's on my computer. I'm ready when they come to me. And so that's really, sometimes you just have to adjust to their style and approach. Good. Was there another question, Jessica?
No, that was it. We did get a couple of responses. It seems like most haven't met with like a mentor or a coach, but those who did met weekly.
Okay, great. We could probably do a whole different session on what the difference between a mentor and coach is, so I won't go into too much detail on that. The way I tend to define that, and you'll hear different definitions, but for me, a mentor is really somebody that's been my lifelong career coach. It's somebody who I feel like I have a really good relationship with, who's invested in me, and who wants to really see me be successful in my career. And my mentors, I generally may meet, that might be that once a quarter lunch that somebody mentioned, or it might be when I'm really having when I feel like I'm at a fork road in my career and I have some overall career type of feedback that I want to get. That would be when I would tend to meet with my mentors. So those tend to be, generally speaking, less of a structured cadence and more of a true career coach. A coach is somebody that you typically would be working with to develop a particular skill or knowledge or ability. And so the frequency there is going to depend on a couple things. It depends on what you're trying to improve. Sometimes if I'm trying to improve something from a computer standpoint, for example, that probably doesn't need to be a regularly scheduled cadence. We just might meet a lot until I feel like I've mastered the skill. So it really depends on what you're trying to work through. But if it's something where you're really trying to build something as a habit, maybe you're working on how to get better with delegating or get better with prioritization, that you probably want to have to be a pretty frequent cadence, but you also have to take into account how frequently that coach is willing to make the time to meet with you. So generally speaking, my best recommendation there is biweekly or once a month, but it really does depend on what you're working through. If it's something that's not a simple behavior to change, that may be something that you do more once every few months over a period of time in your career.
We did have one more question. How do you find either a mentor or a coach in the first place?
Okay, great question. There's a few different ways that you can find a mentor or coach. First of all, a lot of organizations have very formal programs for that. So Corning, for example, has formal coaching programs, and we have some both at a corporate level and also some that are more at a division level. And so in those particular programs, there will be some sort of an evaluation or intake process where you really share a little bit about yourself and what you're looking for in a coach. And if you're a future potential coach, you share what you think your strengths are and where you think you could help. And then there's usually some sort of a matching process to get people assigned to a coach. So whenever you join an organization, that's one of the things I would ask is whether or not a formal coaching process exists and how you would get paired up with a coach. The other way that it can happen is more, I call it more the shoulder tap approach. So most organizations have talent planning processes of some sort. And often as part of that talent planning process for our high potential talent, we'll talk about what types of things we think they'll need from a career development perspective. And that usually would be management and HR management in a room. And then we would talk about who are the people that we think are really strong in that in the organization that we could pair them up with. And so it might be that at some point in your career, somebody from HR or your supervisor comes to you and says, you know, we've been talking and we really think this person would be a great coach for you, and we think specifically they'd be really good at coaching you in X area. Let's go ahead and get you paired up and work together. And then other times it's you just coming to the other direction. You come to your manager or supervisor and say, this is a skill in an area that I really would like to develop. Do you know somebody who's really strong at that? And then I have also found throughout my career that many of my coaches came from other coaches. You know, it was people that I had really, you know, coaches often become career mentors because they want to invest in you, and they will refer you to other people as you go through your career and your needs change. You know, you'll find, full transparency, there's going to be things that you work on forever in your career. It's just constantly a challenge for you to try to do things. And you'll want coaches in those areas. And then there's other things that you learn it and you never have to look back on that one, and again, it becomes a habit. So coaches are something that evolves. You're not going to have the same coaching needs as you go through your career. So there generally is a very formal start to a coaching relationship. There almost is never a formal end to a coaching relationship. It either sort of starts to just dissipate out as you no longer have that need, or the coach no longer has the time, or it just, you stop scheduling the meetings because you're feeling pretty good in that area. So that one is a little different than sort of a supervisor-subordinate relationship. So that's why the time with coaches is even more critical, because there's no beginning and end. It's sort of an evolution in the process. Okay. For some reason, this slide does not want to advance, so give me just a minute. We'll try the trick again. This is new. While we're waiting, are there other questions in the?
Nope. Not right now. Sometimes if you stop sharing and then reshare. So.
Yeah. Well, luckily I only have a few other slides left, and then we can. All right. Let's try. Try it one more time here, and if not, what I'm doing is taking a quick look at the rest of the slides so that I can keep talking and we don't have to keep going back to the content. Okay, so just a couple other key points, and then we can really get into some conversation. So one of the things I want to talk about is, and I'm going to, hopefully everybody can see, I'm going to avoid putting it in the slide mode because I think that's when we get hung up. writing things down is really important. It seems like a no-brainer, right? And when you're early in your career, you have really good memory, you tend to have more focused jobs, and you don't always really have to take notes in everything you do. As you grow in your career, what you'll find is by the time you leave that one-on-one meeting and get down the hall, you've been stopped 8 times, your focus is already on your next 3 meetings. It can be really easy to think you're going to remember what you said in a meeting and what you committed to in a meeting and forget pretty quickly. So we definitely recommend come up with your process for taking notes. It's probably a good idea to align with your supervisor on this as well. So for example, some people really prefer to use only electronic notes, but for some supervisors, the idea of you sitting there staring at your laptop during the one-on-one, they don't like. Other people have a good paper and pencil system, a notebook system. You have to find first what's going to work the best for you, what's going to keep you the most efficient, what's going to keep you on track, and then determine what's going to be appropriate for your supervisor. But I do recommend, what I personally do is I keep a notebook. This one for me always feels like I work better with a paper and pencil for my notes for a one-on-one. And I typically will have sections in that notebook so that each time I can go back and refer to it and remember, you know, what we talked about the last time. So when we left off at the last meeting, we said X, where are we going to pick up in this meeting? Another mechanism that I've seen a lot of people use that works really well for them is they have a folder for each person that they're going to have a one-on-one with, and they keep just loose leaf paper in there. And then as if something happens and there's a meeting that comes up and they get an email and they want to talk to that person about it in the next one-on-one, they print the email, they put it in the folder. They have the paper in there for the notes, and they can just kind of keep a running list for the year on what they've talked about during one-on-ones. Find what works for you, but definitely have a system. Keeping it on Post-it notes or writing it in a big notebook that's going to get lost usually is not very effective. You really want to have a system and a process. And this is a great opportunity for those of you who've had one-on-ones. Feel free in the chat to share what worked really well for you. But have a system, have a process, make it a habit. The key to having good one-on-ones is doing them, and that sounds so simple, and that's probably the most simple piece of advice I'm going to give you in the entire 6 weeks we do these sessions. That sounds like a no-brainer, but you're not going to have a good one-on-one if you don't have them. So it's definitely recommended. If you are new to a role and you join an organization and your supervisor doesn't mention one-on-ones or they don't get them on the schedule, initiate that yourself. Ask them if they do one-on-ones and tell them that you find it's a really powerful tool and you would like to make sure that you get them scheduled. Many of you mentioned this early in the chat. Be on time. There is nothing worse than being late for a one-on-one. It's not like you can sneak into the meeting late and nobody notices. It's pretty obvious, and it can really be considered disrespectful. By the way, you will have supervisors who are late for your one-on-ones, right? And it doesn't mean they're trying to disrespect you any more than you're trying to disrespect them, but it can leave a bad impression if it happens more than once. Certainly we have all had those moments. What I tend to do is if I'm running late on a call or I'm in another meeting or I'm in HR, do a lot of job interviews. Sometimes I don't have a ton of control over those. I'm waiting for the next interviewer to come. Send a courtesy text and say, in an interview running a few minutes late, in a meeting running a few minutes late, at least so they know where you are. And then just try your best not to let that become a habit. Change the setting here and there. One of my best PD&Rs, which is what Corning calls our performance evaluations, happened on an airplane when we were on a business trip together. Take a walk, grab a cup of coffee. Changing the setting can really help in changing the effectiveness of your one-on-ones and keep them from becoming too monotonous. And it is okay to cancel. It's okay to send a message and say, I'm on vacation next week. Hey, I've got that critical project that I need to do. I think if we move this meeting out a week, I'll be able to give you a much better update. That's all generally okay. It's really the communication is the important part for that, making sure that your supervisor feels that it's okay, and just making sure that you're communicating as opposed to not showing up. And so really, this is, I think, a great quote. When you talk, you're only repeating what you already know, but if you listen, you may learn something new. Don't forget to build listening time into one-on-ones. It's really important. And I go back to the question somebody asked me earlier in the session on how you build relationships. You build relationships by being a good listener, and so use that during your one-on-one time as well. And so with that, what I would like to do is I'll keep this up. We've talked quite a bit about cadence, so I don't feel the need to go into a ton of detail there. So what I would like to do is go ahead and turn it over to the chat and answer any questions that you may have about how to have an effective one-on-one relationships, small group meetings, anything of that nature. I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
I'll kind of just jump in here because I was actually talking about this in a meeting this morning, but just how I wish that I had learned this earlier in my career is I'm actually kind of embarrassed that I figured this out now, but just that keeping a running list of things, like for different meetings, all my different meetings that I have every week, I just have a separate sheet of paper with a list and I just jot down notes every day of like, oh, we should talk about that on Thursday. We should talk about that on Friday. And I'm like, honestly embarrassed that it took me so long to figure it out because it's just been so helpful. Okay, we do have a question. So if we have time to cover one-on-ones for mentors, peers, and coaches, it would be much appreciated. And then another question is it acceptable to talk about promotions and raises during one-on-ones?
Okay, both great questions. So I'm going to tackle the mentors and coaches first. There's a couple pieces of advice I would give there, and again, we could probably have whole sessions on this, so I'm just hitting the surface of these conversations. But I think there's a couple things that are really important, and one is being clear on where you need help. One of the mistakes and sort of career limiting moves that I've seen people make at times is they ask for a coach and they just sort of show up in the meeting and look at the person and they're expecting help, but they're not really clear on what they're asking for from the coach and what their need is. So I think it's really important, without being overly direct and assertive, to be specific on what you're hoping that coach can help you with. Be very respectful of their time. Generally, people who are good coaches are seen as good coaches, are well respected in that space, and lots of people are asking for their time. And so it's really important when you want to leverage a coach or mentor that you be respectful of that and really just tell them up front what you're looking for. That might sound something like, hey, I've noticed lately that I have struggled a bit with focus and prioritization. And we'll use the example Jessica just gave, right? I have a lot going on, but I struggle with how do I best organize that and get it captured into a list and act on that. I recognize that that's something that you're really good at. I've been watching you in meetings. I've been observing you. I can see that you're really good at that. I was wondering if you would be willing to coach me and share that particular knowledge with me. That is very different. As a coach, with you coming to me to ask for that, I know exactly how to help you. I can come with several different suggestions and ideas. I can share with you the things that I've learned. I can share with you where I've struggled in the past. I can share with you how I overcame that. It's very purposeful. It's very specific, and I can get the most out of our time together by helping you there. That's very different than, would you be my coach? Sure. What would you like coaching on? Oh, I don't know. I'd like to grow in my career. Okay. Have you thought about what you want to do? Not really. There's so many choices available. I don't really know what to do. You can kind of see how a coach might struggle with the second, but be very willing and able and ready to help you with the first. The other thing is, if you're not specific with what you need, you're not going to get the desired outcomes out of the coaching relationship. So I do recommend, when you're working with a coach and mentor, to just take a few minutes up front to sort of establish, what are the goals and objectives here? What are we trying to accomplish? And you may not always know, right? Early in your career, you don't know what you don't know, and you may not know what to ask for. That's still okay, but at least take a few minutes in the beginning of the relationship to document, what are we going to try to use our coaching sessions for? What are we trying to solve? Where do we need help? Just taking the time to really think through that and document it will make those sessions so much more effective. And the other thing I would add is that in those relationships, come prepared. When you are utilizing a coach, you are asking for the most precious gift that they have, and that is their time. Never forget that. In today's organizations, people are extremely busy. Time is a sacrifice. The more productive, people want to help, and you will find, especially in a company like Corning, I can't tell you how many times I hear this. It's a helpful company. People want to help. They want to see people be successful and really excel in their careers. Help them with what you need, and you'll get a lot more out of those meetings and sessions. And then what was the second question, Jessica?
Is it acceptable to talk about promotions and raises during a one-on-one?
Absolutely. So here's my best advice on that. You should never hesitate to ask, ever. Sometimes you don't know what you're missing until you ask. And what I always tell people is that you learn a lot about compensation systems, about how companies make decisions, about how people grow in their career by just simply asking the questions. But there are a couple pieces of advice that I would give in doing that. The first, I mentioned this one briefly earlier in the session, is don't take people off guard with doing that. If you have a standard agenda for a one-on-one and you're usually there to talk about your progress on the new engineering project that you're working on, or you're talking about getting some capital equipment moved, and you're in the middle of that conversation and you say, so when am I going to get promoted? That's not really fair to do your supervisor. That's not, we're all humans. And even though we may think about that all the time for you, it doesn't mean that we're ready to rattle off that answer in a one-on-one without preparing. Give them time. Tell them in advance that that's something that you would like to discuss. And I usually would say something like, at your earliest convenience or during our next one-on-one, I'd like to schedule some time to talk about my career, what's next for me, how I can navigate my career at Corning. Putting it out there like that will give them time to really prepare and will help it to be a much better discussion. The other piece of advice that I would give you is, it's okay to ask about your career. It's okay to ask about development. It's okay to ask about the next steps for you. But be careful about doing that too soon. You really shouldn't be asking about the what's next until you're delivering in the what's now. And that's really important. I see a lot of people that when they first come out of school, they're very focused on career advancement. They want to be a manager. They want to be a supervisor. They want to grow their career. And that's all great. It's fantastic. That's what we want for you. But always remember that you have to deliver the impact first. And the people who are delivering the impacts and delivering the results almost never even have to direct their own careers. People will help them and pull them along. Don't make people create push for you. You really excel in your role and deliver the impact. And what you will find is that the more that you're focused on the impact and the results and what you're delivering, the more likely you are to have lots of people coming to you wanting to be your career coach and grow and excel you. So I know that to some extent sounds like a mixed message, and it's not intended that way. I just think it's important for you to know that both matter. You can ask the questions, but be sure that you really honestly give yourself an assessment before you ask those questions, and ask, before I ask about promoting to the next band, how can I assess how I'm really performing in my current band? Really important to do, or grade or job or classification, whatever terms the company uses. Great question. All right, I think we have time for just a few more questions. Are there others in the chat?
Yep. So how do you deal with a situation when a manager focuses on status updates only?
Yeah, I think that it's a tough challenge, and it is one that you will run into. There's a couple things that I have done to overcome that situation. One is, if I really want to give significant project updates and really focus on the overall scope of the project instead of just what I did in the last 2 days from a tactical perspective, having a solid one-pager for your project plan that really focuses on, this is the vision of the project, this is what we're trying to accomplish, these are the key milestones and deliverables, with just a few quick points underneath on what you're doing towards each of those milestones and deliverables. A lot of people don't like to take the time for the conversation, but they're readers or they're visual people. having a handout for something like that that you can give to them and leave with them really works well with some supervisors. Then the other thing is asking for it. I really would like some time to talk about my career. I genuinely appreciate the time that you take and invest in me to talk about the status updates on this project, but I would like to take some time out to talk about the next steps in my careers. When would be convenient for you to do that? It sounds so simple, but very few people do it. We let ourselves get lost in going to those meetings time and time again and just talking about the status updates. Hi, I know that we really had a lot to cover today, and this meeting went faster than I was expecting. There are a couple of pretty critical things that I would like to carve out some time to talk to you about. When would that be a good time? It's constantly bringing people back to it in a way that is constructive. And if you truly can't get through to them, leaving people things in writing and really trying to sell yourself a little bit more. And then sometimes it's about rounding out your inner circle, right? Your manager doesn't have to be there. They're a person that hopefully you can count on. Hopefully they will grow you, they will develop you, they will invest in your career. But let's be honest, some are better at that than others. And you may and probably will in your career get somebody that's not their strength. And as much as you try to course correct and get things to a way that's going to work for you, you just may struggle with getting there. In that case, find coaches, find mentors, find other ways, understand who the stakeholders and champions are in the organization, and find a way to build a relationship with them and leverage others. The other thing that I didn't get into in too much detail, but that can happen with a one-on-one, especially when you're new to an organization, is you will have a natural tendency to have a lot of questions for your supervisors. Where's that form kept? How do I get my corporate credit card? How do I, it's very logistical and tactical types of things. I'm going to let you in on a little secret and tip. Most larger organizations have a position that's either called an administrative assistant or a secretary. Or make very, very good friends with that person, get to know them very well. They are the experts on a lot of those sort of who do I talk to, where do I go to sorts of questions in an organization. And while they're also incredibly busy and you want to be respectful of their time and what they have on their plate, they want to help you to succeed. And a lot of those sorts of questions, you can leverage resources like that. You can leverage your HR department. You can leverage training departments. People that are in those departments and those types of roles are natural helpers, and they want to help you and they want you to succeed. Try to take some things like that and work through it on your own, leveraging some of those other resources as opposed to taking critical one-on-one time with your supervisor. It'll really help you to keep more effective in those meetings and also shows great initiative.
And then we have one more question. So coming out of college, do you have any tips on gaining respect as someone early in their career? So how could you break that mold or idea a more experienced person might have of me?
That is almost like I set somebody up as my wing person to ask that question, because we are going to, I believe it is my next Snacks with Stacie. If not, it's the week after that. So either next Thursday or the week after that, I'm coming back for another session, and that one is going to be called Earning Credibility Early Career. And it's a lot of it is advice that I went out and surveyed 60 engineers and said, what would you tell new engineers? But frankly, as I've gone through it, it's not specific to engineering. It's really good early career advice. So I will tell you my best answer would be come back for that, because we're going to have a full hour session on nothing but that. But just in case there's a few folks who can't make that meeting, there's a couple things that I would share. And my first piece of advice is be inquisitive and ask questions. My second piece of advice would be do that in a way that doesn't disrupt the organization, right? You have to find a way to keep meetings productive and effective, but also don't be afraid and hesitant to ask questions and to learn. Know that there's a lot you don't know, and be extremely committed to go learn it. Be a sponge, ask a lot of questions, learn, and then have the energy, enthusiasm, and passion to drive things to closure. You start your career doing those few things, and you are going to have a very successful career. All right. Well, thank you. This was fun as usual. Is there another quick question, or?
No, just asking about, like, I think you did talk about, promotions and things like that. So how to access an older lecture that I missed. We are actually sending that out this week now that we've figured out how to best host all the videos. But yeah, Stacie, thank you so much again. This was such a great presentation, and thank you to everybody who joined us, especially before a holiday weekend.
You're welcome.
So,
thank you, and everyone have a wonderful holiday weekend.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks, Stacie. There's even some good stuff for us old wily veterans in there, so appreciate that.
Agreed.
Thank you. Take care.
Have a good
Bye.
weekend.
You too.